Get ready for a real and raw conversation about going above and beyond without taking yourself out. That's coming up next.
Hi, and welcome to the Living Richly podcast. We're so glad that you've joined us again this week. And we are back with Kate and Wendy joining us.
Our two favorite people.
Absolutely. Joining us for our episode today. And we're going to be talking today about overperforming and how we've got a kind of cute little cliche, overcoming overperforming. And that's what we're gonna be talking about.
Did you just
today.
come up with that?
I just made that up on the spot. Thank you, ChatGPT. And we're going to be talking today about maybe some of the practices, some of the principles that we can use in order to begin to figure out this whole overperforming thing. And now let's maybe start out by defining what overperforming means to each of us, maybe how it shows up within our lives. So I was about to kind of pick on one of you to start, but I'm going to see if somebody wants to jump in. So what is overperforming for you, and how does it show up?
I have no idea. I've only read about it in books.
When you look up overperforming in the dictionary.
Yeah, you have my picture beside it. No, I refer to myself, I say this to my clients all the time, that I am an overperformer in recovery. I'm a recovering overperformer. It's been going above and beyond has been both a strength of mine, and it's also been at many seasons of my life and many seasons an Achilles heel, where I only know one speed, and I'm learning more and more that there are different speeds that one can operate at. But this notion of just always feeling this pressure to give 100% of the time, again, can lead to it can lead to great breakthroughs, I think, and great results in our lives, but it comes at a high price. Right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think for me, it's the same my whole life. I think there's a lot of this table's full of overperformers. I didn't know, I still have not mastered how to not overperform. For me, it's my go-to. I always, you say 100%, I'm trying to do like 180% on everything. I think for me, overperforming, I've now learned versus high performing, which is my differentiator now. Overperforming comes at a cost to me, whether that's my mental health, my physical health, or the people that I love around me, some way are feeling it.
I love the distinction you just drew there between the difference between overperforming and high performing. I'm sure we're going to explore that more.
We're going to go back to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great.
That was awesome, Kate.
Yeah.
Thanks, Wendy. And it's funny when you say this whole table is overperformers, because, and I think for a lot of us, we are learning to differentiate the difference between overperforming and high performing. I know for me, overperforming has really shown up as a mechanism for me to overcompensate for things I'm trying to avoid in my life.
Wow.
Personal things that I want to procrastinate on, things I don't want to deal with, things that I just want to slide under the rug and pretend never happened. And so I will use overperforming as a way to distract myself, and use that overcompensating as a tool, an unhealthy tool.
Right. Well, it's like we've talked about in so many other episodes of the show, where we are avoiding dealing with ourselves or dealing with important things in our lives that perhaps scare us, frighten us, make us feel uncomfortable. So we throw ourselves into what we feel very comfortable doing, whether it's healthy or not for us in the long run. We throw ourselves into that stuff to make ourselves, it's almost like we're self-medicating with the busyness and the pressure and the stress, almost like we get addicted to it.
We laugh sometimes. We'll one of us will text, in the morning we'll be like, oh, I've got to get this, and this done. It's so critical that I get these things done. And so then we'll be texting later in the day, hey, what are you up to? Oh, I just reorganized the garage. I just did that. It's like everything we can do to avoid the things that are a bit more uncomfortable. It's like, I can relate. Oh yeah. So
organize a garage. I'll take that over dealing with my shit any day. Right?
Any day.
All week long.
Yeah. I know for me, performing fits really well into a topic we just covered not that long ago, and that's the people pleasing. That the overperforming for me it doesn't come out of an internal drive to, I have to get this done. It has to be the best, everything like that. It comes out of this drive to keep other people happy, to make sure everybody's, that everybody's pleased with me, all of that stuff. And so I will go above and beyond at my own burnout, because I want someone else to say, boy, you did a great job with that. And it's be happy with me. And it stems out of that kind of a background.
Yeah, we can so relate. We talked also in the episode that followed that one about boundaries.
Yeah.
And without boundaries, right, when we don't know where one thing starts, ends and another thing starts, then we get lost in the shuffle. And if you have overperforming tendencies, if that is your kind of default setting, any request made of you feels like tremendous pressure to deliver. And I know for me, the idea is it's got to be the best. Everything, it's like, I say it this way, and I tell my clients this all the time, and it's more a reminder to myself that you don't have to give 100% of the time, that's actually not even possible without some putting tremendous stress on yourself, right? So something I'm still learning is, again, that learning how to throttle my life a little bit more meaningfully.
Absolutely. You redline a car the entire time. You're driving down the Queensway, let's say, and you're heading on a 3-hour drive and you're redlining the entire time.
Yeah.
You're not getting 20 minutes down the highway.
You're not. But you're talking to a guy who, I remember a few vehicles back, I had a vehicle that the engine light was on for 4 months before I brought it into the garage. Okay. I'm the guy that will run the tank to go, I wonder if I can go another 20K, right, on an empty tank. I wonder how far this thing will go. And for some people, just the idea of doing that gives them stress. They're like,
I'm
oh my
stressed just thinking about it.
right?
My heart is beating thinking about it.
The gas tank's at 3/4 full. We better get to the gas station.
right?
Yeah.
But let's draw the distinction. Again, I loved how you introduced that. I'd never even considered that until this moment when you said, I'm trying to learn the difference between overperforming and high performing, because I think there is a great value in being someone who is passionate, dedicated, wants to serve, wants to make an impact, I think, and perform at a high level. But there's obviously a distinction there between overperforming. How do you see the difference? How do you know when you're in one or the other?
Yeah, great question. I know for me now, it's like I just mentioned, it's how it shows up for me. Like something is not right. So I'm either physically getting sick, I'm overperforming you can't overperform consistently without something going awry.
Right.
Whether it's your physical health, your mental health, or like I mentioned, or like it comes at the expense of your loved ones around you. So I think when you're overperforming is negatively impacting other people or your own well-being, to me, that's like the cue. Like that is not, I am not like, what am I trying to achieve? What is so fucking important that I have to be here?
Right.
Like no one's holding me here. I'm holding myself here.
Yeah.
So for me, that balance, like high performance, I think is fantastic. I like, for me, that's a positive, right? But the overperformance is when it crosses that line and it's now coming at a cost.
Right. It's detrimental to you. What is, who doesn't want a high performing team member or a high performing team? We talk about this in our other business all the time with the leaders that we work with, high performing athletes. I mean, we just had Ben Bergeron here recently with us, one of the top CrossFit coaches in the world. We had 3-time Olympian and gold medalist Olivier Jean, speed skater, with us. These are all elite high performers. But even in the world of sport, coaches know that you can overtrain to a point where now the training is there. You've lost the benefit, and now it's actually detrimental. But knowing where that line is sometimes is difficult. What about for you guys?
Yeah, well, I think, again, I love that distinction. And we start to, my first thought as you were sharing that, Kate, was that for me, the distinction, I think, between overperforming and high performing is ultimately it's the motive in why you're doing it. It comes from that internal motive. And if you can stop and ask that question about motives, you're able to usually figure out, just high performing here. So living richly, we put a lot of hours into this. We put a lot of our free time into this. It is something that we're doing daily. We're leaning into this, but we're not burning out over it. We don't see it as over. It's a passion that we have, and we want to see this done well, done great. We're willing to invest that, like a high performing athlete who, is going to be measuring out their food. They're going to be measuring everything. They're up at 5 a.m. doing at the gym, or at the, in the case of Olivier Jean, at the rink, all of this stuff. But it's driven out of a desire to push themselves, to exceed, to be successful. Versus somebody who's maybe overperforming is somebody who's doing it out of a need to be liked, out of a need to be accepted, out of a need to be validated, whatever those motives are. When those motives are external, you're probably moving into overperforming versus high performing.
I think it's a lot about the fuel. What is fueling your actions? Yeah. What's fueling your activities, right? I recently saw an article, and we'll post it in the show notes on the NASA website. And the title, or the headline, really got me, because it says, if you think you're stressed, try being a rocket. And it talks about the launch of the Artemis rocket back last fall, one of the largest rockets ever launched, 350 feet tall. This thing at launch, it weighs about 5 million tons, if I remember my math correctly. It needs to create 8 million tons of thrust just to lift it off of the launching pad. And that's equivalent. It has to overcome the equivalent of 13 statues of liberty stacked on top of it. And then as it rises, that 13 turns into 29. And everything is shaking, and that rocket is under some tremendous stress, tremendous pressure, but it's not meant to operate at that except at launch time. And I think for me, the challenge that I've had during the course of my life is operating at like I'm in launch mode all the time. And so things start to rattle, things start to come apart, right? The fuel is designed to get it into orbit, and then it's a very, very different experience. I think one has to look at what is fueling my actions, right?
Yeah, I agree on that. I think for, the overperforming part, I like the way you talked about that, because it's high performance for me is very much about I'm passionate, I'm doing something, I'm excited about it. The overperformance is almost always driven by exterior validation, right? Right. So we're so programmed to think that, your worth is somehow tied to what you do and what you achieve versus who you are. And I think a lot of overperformers are really seeking that external validation from someone else to be like, okay, how, this is fantastic. How are you doing all this as a single mom? Wow. Right. It's that, I'm like, oh yeah, doing good.
Look
right.
At me.
Yeah, really. And I'm dying on the inside. So, but you are seeking some sort of validation somewhere when I think you get into that overperforming piece.
Yep. And then it also crosses over with how you or how people then learn how to treat you. Yeah. Because the more you overperform, that becomes such a undefined expectation on this, Wendy will always do more. I don't need to ask her to do. She just will do it. And then where do you draw that line in the sand? Where then it kind of goes back to one of the other topics that we recorded. How do you learn to create boundaries? How do you learn to say no? How do you learn to, not overcompensate for whatever it is, whatever conversation or whatever it is you're trying to avoid, to have that clarity between, am I overperforming? Am I high performing? And when is enough enough?
Right. I mean, it's so good that you raise that issue. It was Jim Harrington who taught me this concept from Murray Bowen's family systems theory of this overperforming, underperforming reciprocity. We literally train people how to treat us. Right. Think of when you go into Starbucks, right, and you order a coffee. And for the life of me, although I bought coffee there for years, Venti, Grande, I can never remember what they call it. So I always go in and say, give me a large Americano. And they will gently always say, oh, you mean a Grande? Right. They're trying to train me on how to do business with them. Problem is, I refuse to be trained. I'm not a good student when it comes to Starbucks. But we train the people around us all the time how to treat us. And if they're used to us showing up, to your point, fully and going above and beyond, even taking on things that are not our responsibility, what we are encouraging in them is actually underperformance. And then we get caught in this cycle, right? I say this to really capable, strong, high-performing leaders all the time. that your strength may actually squelch or squash the strength of your team because of how it's showing up. It may not give them the opportunity to push themselves to a higher level because they know that if a push comes to shove, you're going to jump in and take over.
It's so hard as a leader. I find it so hard to I remember with my team, and they got very used to me stepping in and helping, and I'm coaching, and then I'm like, no, you're doing for them so they don't have to do it. But I found it's very similar to parenting. That's how I know leadership and parenting to me go hand in hand. They're kind of very similar.
Well, it is leadership.
It's for me to solve it for you. You're not actually going to learn how to do it. If I keep tying my kids' shoes, they're never going to learn how to tie their own shoes, right? So to me, those are they go together. But I find it very hard sometimes to not just do it.
Right.
I just want to take over and do it. And that it is that bit of that overperformer, but you're not giving anyone else, to your point, a chance to learn how to sort of how you show up is then very, very different, right? So yeah, it's interesting.
Well, and then in a work setting, you're training people to not think for themselves.
That's
you're
right.
training people to not be able to solve problems. For me, I have very much a perfectionist tendency, and I've been trying to work really hard on that. Especially parenting. I mean, my kids are older now; they're teenagers, but even when they were younger, we tell them, put your clothes away in the drawer. Well, they're not going to put them away the way I want them to. But
that's a thing, right? Teenagers and chores. I mean, that's a thing. Their level of clean and of the job well done is very different. From
or loading the dishwasher. It's going to look like a Tetris thing, and that's not how I would do it. But letting go with it's done.
Yeah.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be, because who's the dishwasher? Who am I trying to impress with having a really nicely organized dishwasher? Nobody.
The dishwasher gods.
But using that, whether it's work, whether it's parenting, learning to let go of, it's maybe not the way I would do it, but it's done. Yeah. And you're teaching people self-independence and being able to think for themselves.
Right. And good.
And I think this goes into perhaps part of the distinction between overperforming and high performing goes into the notion of work-life balance that we like to talk about, or people often will bring up. And
I don't like that term.
No, and we've talked about it even on this show, why we think it's bullshit that the language of work-life balance is really not the language to use. It's the wrong words. It's the wrong language. But when we think of it in that context, and again, I'm fleshing this out. I have a right to be wrong. I'm fleshing this out. This notion.
We'll tell you.
The idea that it is difficult to burn out as a high performer. It is very easy to burn out as an overperformer.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think this notion of, and that's part of the symptom or the indication, am I high performing? High performing is not bad. And this idea that, you hear people say all the time, well, what do you do to relax? Or what do you do you got to just, why don't you just sit and binge a TV show? Well, maybe that's not how I get re-energized. Maybe I get re-energized by diet. We talk about it all the time when we're texting about creating reels for Living Richly and doing this stuff. And just the other day, again, you were learning some stuff and you sent me one of the are we having fun yet? And I'm like, fuck yeah.
This is great.
Yeah. This is great. I don't need time away from, I don't need to rest when I'm doing that. Now, I'm not doing it all the time, but when your passion is in there, it's hard to burn out when you're engaged in what you're passionate about.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%. The only caveat to that is, at least for me, is most of the work I've done for most of my adult life, I've been very passionate about helping people. Yeah. Even this podcast. I mean, to me, I have the same philosophy I have with my coaching clients, where I tell them that it's my goal that every conversation we have together is the most impactful time they will ever have. And we want every single one of these episodes to be impactful to our audience, to our listeners. So we put our all into it. I put a lot of energy into it. Where I've struggled over the years is the self-care piece wasn't there. And the radical self-acceptance wasn't there either, right? I remember back in the day, and Rob, you might be familiar with this phrase, right? It was almost held up as a badge of honor. I'd rather burn out than rust out, right? You know the saying really well. And so it was almost like if you were burning yourself out, launching that rocket, but it never actually hits orbit. It just stays in that state of tremendous stress and burning of tremendous amount of fuel. That somehow that was noble. So I think you can be passionate about your work, but if you're missing some of those elements, performing athletes know and are trained in self-care, in recovery, in getting the right rest and eating the right food and doing right. But as in business, that right, it's not necessarily, that's not our routine, but learning those self-care strategies to make sure that you're filling your tank and not running on fumes all the time, I think is critical.
Maybe where we're supposed to look for balance isn't in work and life, but exactly what you said, where the balance comes in is, are we implementing the 4 elements that we talk about so often here?
Yeah.
Are we engaging in the things that enrich our lives? Are we doing the things that give us purpose and give us meaning? And the more we take on those elements, high performing will not lead to burnout. Being passionate about what you do won't lead to burnout, because we're learning all of these other pieces. We're putting all of them in together, applying all of them together into what we're doing in the daily life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. And I think it's about surrounding yourself. So just seeing you two, just hearing you talk, Rob, seeing you two work together, and knowing that you're both high performers because you're very passionate about what you do. It's about finding those right people in your life who support you and share those passions with you, but who will also be able to call you out and recognize if you need a day off or time off, or, hey, I'm going to do this. You do, take a rest day or whatever.
You do you.
Right? You do you.
It's my favorite saying.
Yeah, you do you. But having that recognition where you share that same passion and that same energy and that same fire as to what you're doing, but you also know each other's triggers around, okay, so you're not having the best day, or you're at a 40% today, so I'm going to take the other 60, make it 100, and so.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah, I think it's critical. I know when I was in like traditional workforce, I would always, that comparison game, it can get really, really deadly really fast, where, I would always hang out with the other high performers in my office, which is great. Maybe overperformers. I don't know what they were, quite frankly. Could have been over or high. I don't know, but I was comparing myself to them. And I'm like, well, how do they have it all together? How are they able to like do daycare, school, drop off, pick up? They're still very happily married. Their house is like perfect. They look pristine when they come to the office. Their lunch is like the bento perfectly packaged. And I'm like barely like sipping my Timmy's, like maybe have an egg McMuffin in one hand. But so I think that comparison game sometimes too can lead to overperforming, right? So you're trying to hold yourself to a standard, like keeping up with the Joneses.
Yeah. Now you see it even with Instagram, right? You're trying to compare to something that's not real, because what you described with that other person is probably somebody who is overperforming. This has all got to look perfect. And it's that external, the validation around that. This can be a bit of a sensitive, but let's talk about the differences on how overperforming show up with men and women, because I do think that there's a significant difference in how it's whether it's high performing or overperforming, how it's perceived by others, but perhaps some of the pressures that we feel internally. Is there a difference between how it shows up for men and women?
That's a great question.
We're all so quiet.
We're also speechless.
Great question. What are your thoughts on
that? Let me give some thoughts, and then you guys add into this.
If you're going to ask a question like that, you got to step up to the plate and answer it.
I do have an answer. I have the right answer. I have the correct answer for this.
You have a perspective.
So I will give you my answer, and then you can all validate my answer.
Is this how this works?
It's exactly.
I didn't know. I didn't get that memo.
Well, so I do think that certainly professionally, I think men have it easier. I think that women have more to prove, that they have to step in and they have to do more. Whether that's and I think it would fall into the overperforming more than the high performing categories, because they can be doing the same level of high performance work as a male, and it's not recognized the same way. So I think that there's an element of just to get validated, 100%. There needs to be more effort that's done. But then on the flip side of that, the criticism. The man who says, says, yeah, I don't get to see my family as much because I'm having to work and I'm constantly focused and I'm doing this, they're like, oh, you're providing for your family, you're making sacrifices, good for you. The woman who's doing that is the neglectful mother, the neglectful wife.
Yeah.
And why aren't why are you focused so much on your career or why, even if it's a passion, why are you so focused on this when you should be putting more energy into the home and into family? Your home has to be pristine. You walk into a single guy's a bachelor's house and you expect it to be trash, right? For the most part. Like, no, but you expect
trash. It has to be trash.
No, but you expect their TV.
Like every male listener, you are slobs. Okay?
Yeah, well,
that's the message Rob's trying to communicate.
And they're all agreeing with me because they're expecting the TV to be sitting on a milk crate. You're expecting that the bed is just going to be on the floor, right? You walk into a single woman's home or a single mother's home, and it's supposed to be everything is clean and tidy and everything's in its right. Like there's a
baskets everywhere.
There's baskets. There's live, love, laugh posters on the wall.
I actually have 3 separate ones. I do.
Blessed.
Yeah, you got a blessed mug.
Yeah, right.
And a thankful.
And a thankful.
So typical.
What was the question again? Yeah. What? What are we talking about?
You raise a great point. I think you're spot on everything you said. So I will validate your comments.
Appreciate
I think it's true. But I mean, you guys are living that. What's it like for you?
It's that.
All right.
Let's move on to another question then.
We're on a podcast that requires content.
I agree. Done for the day. No, it is that. I mean, I think for women, we've talked about this before on the show, but in the workforce, definitely, I think there's, women will sort of, strive, do more, try harder. Perceptions are different for women in the workforce. I think for women, just in general, they're trying to overperform across the board. So Rob, to your point, like I'm trying to do it at work. I'm also trying to do it at home with my Live, Laugh, Learn posters and my pristine kept house, my candles and my baskets. Like I think as women, we over
what?
Wow.
Did you just say over porn?
Steve, there'll be an edit on the over
I like
porn.
that. We're leaving that in.
Steve, are you here?
Don't edit that out.
That's like the best part of the show.
We're not doing that anymore.
I think we are.
All right, Kate.
Okay, not that kind of show. Yeah. But I think as women, we tend to overperform everywhere. Like I'm not sure we have a good shut off valve where like I'm going to overperform at work today and not at home. I think like they kind of go together.
Yeah. It's almost like we are constantly drinking out of fire hydrants rather than garden hoses because now part of it is that's in our DNA and that's in our nature. Part of it is the expectations that we create upon ourselves, which is nobody's fault but our own. Part of it is what we see on social media, comparing ourselves to a free app that basically tells us how we should look. And then I see it showing up in my daughters right now, how we should look, how we should act, what we should say, what we should do. Why aren't we doing, more? Why aren't we doing less of this, more of this? And it's just it's like being it's like a hamster being on a wheel just to continue. And there is no end in sight.
Right.
Part of that though, is that self-reflection and that self-responsibility on, okay, so nobody's going to fix that shit for me. How am I going to be able to define what I'm going to tolerate and what I'm not going to tolerate? What's important, what's not important maybe right now? And where do I draw that line in the sand? And at the end of the day, who am I trying to impress? If my kid's having a birthday party or I'm having a family celebration and I don't have time to go to the store because God forbid the napkins don't match the plates, who am I trying to impress? And one of my mentors years ago said that to me. And every time something comes up, I try to remember, okay, so who am I trying to impress? This person, that person, me? Where does that kind of
Great
fall?
question.
That's so good. That is so good.
Okay.
We talk about expectations. If I could touch on that for a minute, I remember it was Dr. Sherry Kane, who will be on the show in a few weeks. We'll have a couple of episodes with her. She's been a major influence in my life, your life, all of our lives, and really, actually, you could say that in many ways, her and Jim Harrington kind of almost inspired this whole thing, right? Because of the change and the transformation in our lives. But she used to ask me a question, and she still does on a regular basis. Eric, are your expectations in line with reality? And usually my response to that, my first response is fuck you. Right. And then I have to second guess myself or look at myself and say, are they, am I holding myself to a standard, to your point, that is impossible? I think management of expectations is something only we can do for ourselves. The second piece that's become very real for me and a guideline for me is the only person who can manage my energy is me. So one, am I setting expectations that are too high, that are creating stress and then trigger all these overperforming tendencies to kick in, and have to be conscious that I have a limited reservoir of energy, and that I can't operate as though that doesn't run out ever. So management of expectations, management of energy for me has been a big part of staying within that high performance. I don't want to be a low performer. I mean, it's been said, that nothing great ever happens in the comfort zone, right? Nothing world changing or impactful or influential ever happens done with mediocrity. It's greatness, it's excellence. To borrow Ben's language, chasing excellence. But it's learning to, again, throttle it back to a place of high performance that's healthy versus over performance that leaves you like a hollow shell.
All right, let's get real. Let's share
we weren't real already?
Let's share some stories. We're going to get personal. How about that is a better word. So,
wow.
Let's
sure, I'm ready.
Let's share some
Folks,
stories.
thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week on the Living.
Share a personal time when you fell victim to overperforming. And I hesitate to actually use that language, even as it kind of came out of my mouth. I thought, is it fall victim? Because it's a choice. Overperforming is a choice. You're not a victim of it. It's a choice that you make. So a time in your life where you made the choice for whatever the reasons, where you were overperforming, and it caused something. It led to something, and a breakthrough moment, if you will. And I'll share quickly a story. The first thought that came to mind when it came to, because it was one of the most significant moments, even though it took 5 years to play itself out after the moment happened. But a significant moment was back in my church days when I was still pastoring. I was pastoring Biker's Church. Biker's Church was one of the fastest growing churches, was incredibly significant. We were one of the first churches to go virtual with to go online with our services. We were getting an audience from around the world. We had just started meeting at your church, the one that you were pastoring, that you had just resigned. Well, you hadn't resigned yet, but we were about to come into the building that you were in. Then you resigned. They asked me to fill in as the interim pastor while they were hiring a new pastor. And I'm basically at that point, and I said yes, and I'm pastoring 2 churches. I'm working every single day of the week, because these were both churches that at the time, your church was a church that was a strong, healthy church, but was now going through the transition of their founding leader leaving, and just all the dynamic of that, the amount of energy and the time. And I came to a point of real burnout where after they found the full-time pastor, I remember saying, I need a break. I need to either quit everything. They put me on a 3-month sabbatical, and I took a 3-month sabbatical, and that's when I did my 2008 road trip.
Right, I remember
where I went on my motorcycle and I got away. And I share this in my story in episode 4.
Episode 4. Yep.
I share this in episode 4, where as I'm doing on this road trip, that's when these moments came where I realized I had to make a change in my life. I couldn't continue to do this. And I realized that 90% of what I was doing was to get that well done, the accolades, look at you, you are the rock star, you're the superstar.
We've used this phrase before. It was living under the pressure of dance monkey dance.
It was
right?
Exactly that. I was doing everything for everyone else, but felt completely empty. And I realized something's got to change. Now, It took 5 years for that thing to change, but it was in that moment that I knew I couldn't continue at this stage.
Yeah. 100%.
What about for you guys? A story of overperforming that led to a aha moment in your life?
Well, 2 very quick stories. And one was an aha moment, like, holy shit, what now? And the other was a really good breakthrough. So first one, really quickly, spent 18 years. I shared a little bit about this in my story on the corporate side in human resources, worked so much. And just speaking as what we talked about earlier, in the corporate setting as a female, really trying to climb that corporate ladder, do more, be more, support more, help more. If I just do this, then I'll get here. Anyways, all that to say, we went through a big restructuring. We knew it was going to happen, and always in the back of my head, not to like that it was to sound conceited, but it was, well, they can't get rid of me. Like, look at all the good I've done for this organization.
Right.
Look at all the executives I've supported, all the businesses I've supported. And yeah, they got rid of me. So, but because I was in such a stage of overperforming and working and doing, and my kids were small at the time and I was always in the office, that then led to that breakthrough of, okay, so now I really start to understand how that wasn't serving me. Then my second quick story, moving into competing in fitness. High performing, not overperforming, but high performing, but also at the displeasure of many people in my life.
Right.
Had some great support, some not so great support, continued to high perform because it was a passion of mine, and then led to a breakthrough of where I am today with being able to help people in that space.
Yeah, what a difference, right? Again, how it plays out. I remember there's a phrase that we often use, and it's been used. I remember, again, held as a badge of honor. We talk about, oh, that person's really driven.
Yeah.
Right. And for years, I would say I want to be that driven individual. And it was a few years back, and it was in a conversation with a client after I had done some reflection on it and kind of had an aha moment. I said, when you think of that term, again, I think in the hustle culture, that term would be very popular. Today's modern business culture, I think that term, like we want to be that driven individual. But when you think of the word driven is a passive state. Something else is in control. Something else is behind the wheel, steering, accelerating, braking. A car doesn't decide where it's going to go all on its own. It is a tool that is used.
Yet.
Yeah, it's coming. Right? It's coming. Elon will figure it out, right? But there's this notion of, again, am I in control of my life, right? Am I actually behind the steering wheel? We talked about fuel earlier, but who's behind the steering wheel? It's okay to be ambitious. It's okay to be driven if you at least understand what's actually driving your behavior. But for so long, I didn't understand it. And it would take 3 burnouts for me. And it was the last burnout that led to a significant breakthrough where I went and spent a week with Dr. Sherry in Pennsylvania. And that I had started some work before that, but that was a breakthrough moment to say, I have to change the way that was back in 2017. And it wasn't until 2021 that work landed and I began to experience some significant difference. And I want to say this because I get this question a lot from leaders. How do I know when I'm burnt out? If you're asking the question, you're probably already there or you're on the verge of it. Pay attention to that. Don't keep doubling down on what you're doing. It's only going to harm you further. Take action. Get some help. You don't have to do it this way. Right?
So good.
I think, sorry.
No,
I was going to say for me, overperforming has always served me. And that's the problem.
Yeah.
That's my challenge is, I would say the last 2 years figuring out that's the learning for me has been high I can't say that word today, high performance. And overperformance is just, it's always served me. I've always gotten promoted. I've always gotten the job. I've always been recognized. It's always been what's kind of filled my cup and filled me on that worthiness that for me, that's the challenge. And the expense of it was irrelevant. Right. Until, the last few years where like even, just all the anxiety, and I talk about it in my story a little bit, just all the trauma in my life. And it creeped up so high to the point where I was too full. So overperforming was no longer an option because there was no room. Right. And so I'm physically getting ill. But it took that for me to be able to even recognize, oh, maybe I don't need to like be at 180 all the time. Maybe I can be at 100 even and be high performing and not have it come at a cost. But for me, it has always served me. And that's been my biggest challenge.
So it's interesting because I heard this shared a little bit in some of your stories there. Maybe let's talk about the importance of our community and how our community supports us in that understanding of burnout, of overperforming, of high performance. You made reference to it, how you had some around you that were not supportive and were critical. Others around you, you can have others around you that were very positive, but in a different way. What's the role? We talk so often about the importance of community. Ben last week in his episode shared very much told the story of the power of community within the prison system, which was such an interesting thing.
So if you didn't listen to that one, you want to listen to that show.
So what role does our community play in helping us to identify the difference between high and over performing? And what role do they play in maybe leading us or guiding us? Open that up. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's critical. I think, we say often, to quote Ken Blanchard, feedback is the breakfast of champions. Mm-hmm. And if you're operating in a vacuum, or in isolation, right, it's very hard for anyone to really have perspective on where they're truly at. It's so helpful to have outside feedback. Now, that's always better when it's been invited by trusted people. I think when we may give well-meaning feedback to someone, but if we don't have the relationship or we don't have the trust, it may come across a very different way, right? So, but yeah, I agree. I think especially the folks that know you, that love you, that are closest to you, when they see you begin to vibrate at an unhealthy rate, can help dial you back down, can remind you of the commitments you've made to reach your full potential and chase excellence and live your best life. Again, this show is not about us discouraging high performance at all. I think there's a lot of folks perhaps watching this episode that might need a bit of a kick in the pants to say, get off the couch and go live your life. Like, there's more to life than just the average ho-hum mediocre trance that so much of the population is in. Our goal today is to speak to those people that are just throttling it too high, too long, too often. But I agree, your community can be such a safe place and bring such encouragement and call you on your shit when you need to be called on your shit.
And I think communicating that and being very open about whoever's in your life. So you do a great job of this, and some close friends do a great job of this. I have had to be very vocal about here what some of my triggers are. Here are the signs that I start to exhibit when my cup is starting to become very depleted, even though I subconsciously sort of know it. I don't want to deal with it because I love work. I love what I do. I have such a passion for it. But I also will trust when you speak up that is my sign to take a step back, not get defensive, and recognize I have communicated. I need you to tell me when you start to see me exhibiting signs, triggers, this is your cue, even though I might not like it, to be able to share and be okay with myself that it's not something you're going to want to hear, but oftentimes it's the things that we don't want to hear that help us become the people that we want to be.
Right.
Well, and it's giving, and I like what you said at the beginning there too about we have to give permission to our community to do that, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Trusted advisors. And I'm not interested in somebody walking down the street giving me their opinion about anything really in life. But certainly I'm not interested in them giving the opinion about how I'm performing, even if I'm at the gym, right? The last thing I need when I'm at the gym is some yahoo who's working out beside me to turn and want to correct my
your form is bad, or you need to do it this way.
It's like, just do your thing and don't worry about me.
Yeah.
Trusted advisors, I've given permission. Hey, you have, and Eric, you and I've had these conversations together. You have permission to say, Rob, I'm seeing something here. I want to challenge that. Of course, more than anyone else, Wendy has that permission to be able to do that, and vice versa. We've had those conversations, and it's fucking uncomfortable in the moment. There have been times where I'll say to Wendy, hey, I'm concerned. I see this. I'm seeing some of these flags, and often the first reaction can be, I'm fine. Yeah, right?
Leave me alone.
Yeah,
it's none of your goddamn business.
Yeah, exactly. I just need to do this. Stop nagging me, right? No, she doesn't do that. She
thinks it. She thinks it.
Oh no, she thinks it, and she gives me a look. One thing, listen, just a little tip here.
Oh,
if
dear.
you're ever playing poker, don't play poker with her on your team. You want to play against her. Poker face? Nope.
There's no poker
Yeah.
face.
So,
Noted.
it can be uncomfortable in the moment, but that's where the relationship has to be trustworthy enough that as the one
100%.
giving the feedback, I'm prepared to hurt the relationship short term to protect somebody who I care about.
Yeah, I think that's so good. What if we shifted? I'd like just as we are preparing to wind down today's show, what are some tactics, some rituals, some practices that have really been helpful for you in countering these overperforming tendencies that are unhealthy? What are some of the things that you're doing different these days than perhaps in the past?
I think for me, it's something I read and that we've read, and it's that your productivity is not tied to your worth. And that statement grounds me in to not overperform.
Right.
My productivity, what I do in a day, doesn't make me worthy of love. It doesn't make me worthy of anything.
Right.
It's just being productive. So that for me is sort of like an I am statement, an affirmation that I use to help ground me when I feel like I'm getting to that, okay, Kate, your worth is not tied to your productivity. Your worth is not tied to your productivity. And I say it over and over again, but it's a reminder for me where I'm like to your point, who am I doing this for?
Right. What's the fuel? Right.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that you mentioned the word affirmation because I will say this. I have a lot of clients that have said, oh, I've heard all the whole journaling and affirmation bullshit and it's so fluffy, but your mind listens to everything you tell it.
Absolutely.
So, and we are master storytellers in our head and we often choose to listen to the things that maybe we shouldn't be listening to.
Yeah.
So I love that you said that you use that as an affirmation because if anybody's looking for something to kind of tie into their day-to-day ritual or their day-to-day routines, it's those simple statements like that over time, right? Your mind is like a muscle and it starts to become very conditioned to remembering that. So I just love that you brought that up.
That is so good. Ben, you talk about being a storyteller. We are master storytellers. And Ben brought it out in the last episode that what a storyteller does often is create drama. And so when our mindset is off, when our beliefs are off, then we're creating unnecessary drama in our lives. So the importance, I actually have, and this is more recent. It was interesting, with the launch of this podcast and a lot of exciting things that are coming later this year into 2024. We're in full launch mode. And part of it, I'm just jazzed by it, but I also am very aware that my overperforming tendencies are being triggered constantly. So to the point where I've come up with a list of easy does it affirmations. That's what I actually call them. And part of it is asking myself, what's driving me? Why am I pushing myself here? Is it passion? Is it purpose? Or is it pride or a point to prove? And I have a series of them, and I'm happy to actually post them in the show notes if they're helpful for people, but a number of questions just to ask myself to kind of ground myself, say, what's actually fueling me right now? And if it's bad fuel, if it's toxic fuel, okay, all right, I've been running on bad fuel. Well, let's make a change, because even a car can run on bad fuel for a while.
Right.
But you don't want to be running it on it long term.
I think for me, one of the things that I've learned to do is embrace the reset.
Oh, I love that.
And this notion of,
I came up with that.
Yeah. Eric,
I just trademarked it.
Steve
EmbraceTheReset.com just been registered on the internet.
Hey, Steve, you here? Yay! Hey! I haven't done that in a while. No. Embrace the reset. For me, getting out, so doing this is where you go back to the rituals that give you energy. If I can get out on the water, or if I can jump on, we'll go out on for a bicycle, get on bicycles, go for a ride, or go for a walk, or sit and read a book. If in those moments I'm completely consumed with this other thing, then that's a great sign that that's the warning light, right?
Yeah.
If I can engage in my rituals and have that put aside, no matter how passionate I am about that, whatever that thing is, I'm probably more in the high performance area, and that's okay because I'm able to make that shift. And so it's a great way for me to just kind of go, okay, it's time to test where am I on this? Can I embrace a reset all right, now I can jump back in again. And I think that's with Living Richly, we can go nuts with stuff. We can go crazy. Today's, when we record episodes, behind the scenes here, we do a bunch of episodes all at once is how we record them. We're tired by the end of the day, but we can then the next day we can be like, okay, now we're good to do nothing.
Right.
We can embrace the reset on those things.
I love that. Absolutely love that.
And I think for me, it's just taking it down to basics every night. I write down my daily intentions that I want to do the next day. And Rob knows because I'll pull up my little book and I don't want to talk or do anything until I have those down. And all those intentions are anywhere from 3 to 5 things that I would like to get done the next day. And they could be very small. In fact, they usually are very small because I have great satisfaction of checking things off.
Yeah.
There's something about that is just very satisfying. Yeah. But it allows me to keep myself in check where I don't need to complete 150 things. But if I can get these 3 things done, then I feel like that is a 100% day for me.
Yeah.
And I find putting that pen to paper and so that I know I have a game plan in the morning when I already know what I want to do and I feel like I don't need to take on the entire world. I find that super helpful.
Love it.
All of that is so great. Let's, all right, final round, real quick. Word of advice to the overperformers that are listening to today's show. You're going to look right into your camera and you're going to speak to them directly. What do you want to say to them?
Hi.
Your worth is not wrapped up in your doing. And the moment we can realize that we embrace our worth, again, this radical self-acceptance is the start to breaking the habit of overperforming.
Love that.
I would say you are the only one that has complete control over what you decide to say yes to, what you decide to take on, and how you choose to place your energy and where that goes. You are the only one that has control over that.
Yeah. And I'm going to leverage what you said, Wendy, but ask yourself the question, who are you doing this for? I think that's so critical. Really sink into and think on it. Is this for you? Am I doing this for someone else? I think at the end of the day, if you can ask yourself that question and answer it, you'll probably be able to figure out if you're in that overperforming or high performing.
So good. I would say that life is too short to leave any potential on the table, right? You've got an opportunity to live a full life, a rich life, but you won't find it in mediocrity. You won't find it in average. But you also won't find it in overperforming. Do you want to have 10 years of potential or do you want to have a lifetime of potential? And if you're going to do that, you're going to have to pace yourself. High performers take care of themselves. Make sure you're taking care of you.
I want to thank you so much for taking the time to listen in on this episode. And I want to ask you a couple of things, invite you to do a couple of things. We haven't done this in a while. We would love you to share with us or just send us a note with some questions, some topic ideas that you would love to see us cover in a future episode. And so if you have a moment to be able to just do that, we'll have the email address info@livingrichley.me. You can send that information there, and any questions, any comments that you have, we would appreciate you doing that. Make sure you go to our website, livingrichley.me/act, and you will find the show notes. You'll find the questions that Eric mentioned that he asks himself, as well as some of the other resources that we have for this episode.
Yeah, and make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the show so you don't miss anything coming up. There's going to be a lot of exciting things coming your way later this fall and into 2024, so you don't want to miss all of that good news. And again, thank you for joining us today, folks. We are so grateful that you're tuning in every week. We hope you're finding these conversations impactful. We'll see you next week. Until then, get out there and live your best life.